The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across nearly a mile of polished stone and floating platforms. Representatives from 217 species had gathered on Prime for what many considered the most important vote of the century. The air hummed with translators converting thousands of alien languages into something each delegate could understand. Ambassador of the Dominion stood at the central podium. He was tall even by his species standards, with blue-gray skin and four muscular arms that moved with practiced elegance. His voice echoed through the chamber as the final votes were counted on the massive display behind him. "The motion has passed by unanimous decision," announced. "Effective immediately, all humans are hereby banned from military operations within Council-protected space. They are forbidden from carrying weapons on any vessel registered under Council jurisdiction. They are excluded from defensive contracts and security positions." The chamber erupted in applause and sounds of approval that ranged from clicks to whistles to deep rumbling growls. Several delegates rose from their seats in celebration. Commander Laura watched from the observation gallery above the main floor. She was not permitted to speak at these proceedings. Humans had no voting rights in the council. They were guests at best and nuisances at worst. She stood perfectly still in her dress uniform, her hands clasped behind her back, as 200 species celebrated the decision to strip her people of the right to defend themselves. Beside her stood Daniel, Earth's official ambassador to the Galactic Council. He was a patient man who had spent 30 years in diplomatic service, but even his composure was being tested today. "This is wrong," Laura said quietly. "They have no idea what they are doing." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know, but we have to play the long game here. Reacting with anger will only prove their point about us." Below them, Delegate of the Collective was addressing the chamber. There were beings with four compound eyes and mandibles that clicked rapidly when they spoke. Was considered one of the most influential voices on the council, and he had been pushing for this ban for over a decade. "Today marks a new era of peace and stability," declared. "The human species, while useful for certain labor functions, has proven itself too volatile and aggressive for civilized military operations. There are barely 100 cycles. They breed rapidly and think even more rapidly, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic." Laughter spread through the chamber. A delegate made a joke about humans being clever animals that had somehow learned to build ships. The translator picked it up and broadcast it to everyone present. Laura's jaw tightened, but she did not move. "Their so-called military tactics are barbaric," continued. "They engage in direct combat when any sensible species would retreat. They sacrifice their own lives for strategic gains that could be achieved through patience. They are dangerous not because they are strong, but because they do not know when to stop." More applause followed. Admiral nodded in agreement and added his own thoughts. 2 years ago, a single human mercenary unit engaged 3 cruisers during a border dispute, said. "The humans were outnumbered 40-1. They should have surrendered. Instead, they fought for 6 hours and destroyed all 3 ships. Over 800 soldiers died that day." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Many delegates shifted uncomfortably. The incident had been widely reported, and it had terrified much of the galaxy. "This is precisely why the ban is necessary," concluded. "Humans do not understand proportional response. They do not understand acceptable losses. They only understand victory or death. Such a species cannot be trusted with weapons." Laura finally spoke, though only Daniel could hear her. "They are afraid of us." "Yes," Daniel agreed, "and fear makes people do foolish things." The vote was finalized and recorded. The ban would take effect in 30 standard days. All human military personnel serving in Council space would be reassigned to non-combat roles. All human-owned vessels would be inspected and stripped of weapons. Any human found carrying a weapon would face imprisonment. As the delegates began to leave the chamber, Many of them passed by the observation gallery where Laura and Daniel stood. Some ignored them entirely. Others stared with open contempt or amusement. A young aide stopped directly in front of Laura and examined her with all four eyes. His mandibles clicked in what the translator rendered as condescending laughter. "Such small creatures," the aide said. "No claws, no armor, no venom. How did you ever survive on your own world?" Laura looked at him calmly. "We did what we had to do." "And now you will do what we tell you to do," the aide replied. "That is the natural order of things. The strong rule, the weak serve." He walked away without waiting for a response. Laura watched him go and said nothing. Daniel guided her toward the exit. They walked through corridors filled with alien species that towered over them, that could crush them with a single blow, that had measured in centuries. Everywhere they went, they heard whispers and saw pointing gestures. "They think we are finished," Laura said as they reached their shuttle. "They think they have contained us." "Have they?" Daniel asked. Laura climbed into the shuttle and looked back at the massive council building. Somewhere inside, 200 species were celebrating the end of human military influence in the galaxy. "Humans have been underestimated before," Laura said, "by predators that were faster than us, by climates that should have killed us, by diseases that wiped out millions, by each other during wars that burned half our world." She sat down and strapped herself in as the shuttle's engines powered up. "We survived all of it," she continued. "We did not just survive, we thrived. We conquered our planet and then we left it behind. We crossed the void between stars because we refused to accept limits." Daniel nodded slowly. "So what do we do now?" "We wait," Laura said. "We follow their rules. We let them believe they have one." The shuttle lifted off and rose through the atmosphere of Prime. Below them, the council building shrank to a tiny speck, then disappeared entirely as they broke through the clouds. "And when they realize they need us?" Daniel asked. Laura looked out the window at the stars stretching endlessly in every direction. Somewhere out there, threats were gathering, species that did not negotiate, forces that did not respect council borders or diplomatic agreements. "When they need us," Laura said quietly, "we will be ready." 6 months later, the galaxy would learn exactly what that meant. The swarm was coming, and the council's precious band would be tested in blood and fire. But for now, Laura sat in silence and watched the stars, already planning for the day when humanity would prove its worth. The council had made its decision. They had laughed and celebrated and congratulated themselves on containing the dangerous humans. They had no idea what they had done. The mining colony on Seven sat on the edge of council-protected space. It was a gray world of rock and dust where 12,000 workers extracted valuable minerals from deep underground tunnels. Most of the population was, with smaller numbers of, and a handful of other species mixed in. There were also 93 humans who worked various jobs around the station. Shaw was the station administrator. He was a 42-year-old man from a small town in Ohio who had spent 15 years working his way up through colony management. He was good at his job because he stayed calm when others panicked, and he solved problems instead of complaining about them. At 3 in the morning, was woken by an alarm that made his blood run cold. He had never heard that particular sound before, but he knew exactly what it meant. He ran to the command center in his sleeping clothes. Harrison was already there, standing in front of the main display with a grim expression on his face. Was the head of station security, a former Marine who had served 20 years in Earth's Defense Force before the council ban forced him into early retirement. "Talk to me," said as he reached the console. Pointed at the screen, it showed a field of red dots approaching from the outer system. Each dot represented a ship. "Swarm," said. 47 vessels confirmed. 3 patrol ships engaged them at the outer marker about an hour ago. And all 3 ships were destroyed in under 4 minutes. No survivors. stared at the screen. They were not part of the Galactic Council. They did not sign treaties or respect borders. They were a hive species that existed only to consume. When they found a world with resources, they stripped it bare. When they found other species, they killed them without hesitation or mercy. "How long until they reach us?" asked. 6 hours at their current speed. "And the nearest council fleet?" His expression darkened. 9 hours. I already sent the distress signal. Admiral himself responded. He said they are coming as fast as they can. Did the math in his head. 3 hours. They would have 3 hours to do whatever they wanted before help arrived. "We need to evacuate," said. "How many shuttles do we have?" 6. They can hold maybe 800 people if we pack them tight. "We have 12,000 people on this station." "I know." They stood in silence for a moment. Outside the command center windows, the colony continued its normal operations. Workers moved between buildings. Transports carried ore from the mines to the processing plants. Children played in the recreation areas. None of them knew what was coming. "The council banned us from having weapons," said slowly. "We have nothing to fight with." Looked at him with an expression that could not quite read. "That depends on how you define nothing." "What do you mean?" Walked to a private terminal and entered a long series of codes. A file appeared on the screen showing cargo manifests from the past 2 years. Dozens of shipments were highlighted. "When the ban went into effect, I knew this day would come," explained. "Not here specifically, but somewhere. Some colony would be attacked and there would be no one to defend it." "What did you do?" "I made arrangements. There are crates in Storage Bay 7 marked as agricultural equipment. They are not agricultural equipment." Understood immediately. Smuggled weapons. Enough to arm maybe 30 or 40 people. It was a direct violation of council law. If they were caught, they would all be imprisoned for decades. But if they did nothing, 12,000 people would die. "How many fighters do we have?" asked. 30 humans with military experience, all former soldiers, all volunteers who knew the risks when they signed up for this posting. 30 against 47 ships. 30 against whatever ground forces those ships are carrying. They do not negotiate. They land troops, they kill everyone, they take what they want. Our job is to hold them long enough for the evacuation. Ran his hands through his hair. This was insane. This was suicide. This was also the only option. "Do it," he said. "Get your people armed. I will start the evacuation." Was already moving toward the door when an elder named burst into the command center. He was one of the senior miners, a respected member of the community who had lived on 7 for over 40 years. "What is happening?" demanded. "Why was there an alarm? Why are my people whispering about an attack?" Showed him the display. His blue-gray skin turned pale as he saw the approaching fleet. "The council will protect us," said. "They promise protection to all member worlds." "The council is 9 hours away," replied. "They will be here in 6. "Then we must hide. We must surrender. Perhaps they will show mercy." Stopped at the door and turned back. They do not show mercy. They do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate. Your only chance is to get on those evacuation shuttles. "But there is not enough room," protested. "You said only 800 can fit." "Then we will buy time for more trips," said. "We will hold them as long as we can." Looked at with confusion in his 4 eyes. You are human, you have no weapons, you have no ships. What can you possibly do against the—" Smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We are human. That is exactly what we can do." He left the command center without another word. Within 30 minutes, the evacuation alarms were sounding across the colony. Within an hour, the first shuttle was loading with women, children, and elderly passengers. Within 2 hours, Harrison and 29 other humans had armed themselves with pulse rifles, plasma grenades, and 3 shoulder-mounted rail guns that could punch through tank armor. They gathered in the eastern sector where the landing pods would most likely touch down. They checked their weapons and shared ammunition. They said goodbye to friends and family who were boarding the evacuation shuttles. A young woman named Morales was the youngest of the group at 23. She had joined the military straight out of high school and had been discharged when the ban went into effect. She had spent the past 6 months working as a maintenance technician, but she had never stopped training. "Are we really doing this?" she asked as they watched the horizon. "We are. 30 of us against thousands of them." Chambered a round in his rifle. "Then I guess we better make every shot count." The sun was rising over 7. In 4 hours they would arrive, and 30 humans would show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The first landing pods hit the eastern mining fields at dawn. They came down like meteors, screaming through the atmosphere and slamming into the rocky ground with enough force to crack the earth. Each pod was the size of a small building, and each one carried 50 warriors. Harrison watched through his rifle scope as the pods opened and the enemy poured out. They were nightmares made flesh. They stood 8 feet tall on 4 powerful legs. Their bodies were covered in dark chitinous armor that gleamed like wet stone. They had 2 arms ending in claws that could slice through metal, and their heads were eyeless masses of sensory organs and razor-sharp mandibles. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move. "Hold your fire," ordered through the comm system. "Let them get closer." 29 humans lay hidden in positions across a half-mile defensive line. They were dug into abandoned mining trenches, perched on equipment platforms, and concealed behind ore processing units. They had spent 3 hours preparing the killing ground. The first wave was 200 strong. They spread out across the mining field in perfect formation, moving toward the colony with mechanical precision. Their species had conquered dozens of worlds. They had destroyed civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. They expected no resistance from a backwater mining colony. Morales steadied her breathing. She could see them clearly now. Their claws scraped against the rocks as they advanced. Their mandibles clicked in some alien form of communication. They were hunting. "Steady," said. "Wait for my mark." They reached the first marker, a painted rock that had placed exactly 300 meters from the main defensive line. At that range, their pulse rifles would be most effective. Now, 30 humans opened fire at once. The sound was deafening. Pulse rounds tore through the morning air and slammed into the advancing. The first row of warriors went down instantly, their armor shattering under the kinetic impacts. The second row stumbled over the bodies. The third row tried to scatter. They were too slow. In the first 8 seconds, 60 lay dead or dying. The perfect formation collapsed into chaos. These creatures had fought dozens of species across the galaxy, but they had never encountered concentrated small arms fire from entrenched infantry. Their armor was designed to deflect energy weapons, not high-velocity projectiles that punch through like needles through cloth. "Keep firing," shouted. "Push them back." The humans advanced. They moved from cover to cover, firing in coordinated bursts, each squad covering the others. They tried to regroup, but the humans gave them no time. Every second brought more casualties. Every meter of ground cost the enemy lives. By the time the first wave broke and retreated, over 150 warriors lay scattered across the mining field. The humans had not lost a single fighter. "They are running," said with disbelief in her voice. "They are actually running." "They will be back," replied. "Reload and check your positions. That was just the scouting party." He was right. Within an hour, the second wave arrived. This time there were 500, and they had learned from the first attack. They came from 3 directions at once, using the terrain for cover, moving in unpredictable patterns. The battle that followed was brutal. The humans fought for every inch of ground. When they got close enough for melee combat, the humans fell back to secondary positions. When the aliens tried to flank them, the humans collapsed buildings to block their path. Sergeant Cole was leading the northern defensive line when a warrior got through. The creature was on him before he could react, its claw sweeping toward his chest, raised his arm to block, and the blade cut through flesh and bone like paper. He screamed as his left arm fell to the ground. Blood sprayed across the rocks. The raised its other claw for the killing blow. Shot it in the face with his sidearm. Then he grabbed a plasma torch from his belt and pressed it against the stump of his arm. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. But when it was over, the bleeding had stopped. He picked up his rifle with his remaining hand and kept fighting. "Cole is down," someone shouted over the comms. "Cole is fine," replied through gritted teeth. "Focus on your sectors." By noon, they had lost over 3,000 warriors. The humans had lost 8. The remaining 22 fighters had all taken wounds of varying severity. They were running low on ammunition. They were exhausted, and the enemy kept coming. Corporal Torres was holding the southern perimeter when she saw an opportunity. A group of 200 had taken shelter in an abandoned processing plant, using it as a staging area for their assaults. The building's power core was still active. "I can take them out," she told over the comm, "but I need to get inside." "That is a suicide mission." "It is a strategic necessity. If I blow that core, I take out 200 of them at once. That buys you another hour for the evacuation." Was silent for a long moment. He knew she was right. He also knew what he was asking her to do. "Do it," he said finally, "and try to get out alive." "No promises." She moved through the battlefield like a ghost, using the chaos to slip past enemy lines. She reached the processing plant and fought her way inside, killing 6 in close quarters combat. She found the power core and set it to overload. Then the building came down on top of her. The explosion killed 212 warriors. It also buried under tons of rubble. Everyone assumed she was dead. 3 hours later, a search team found her crawling toward the defensive line with 2 broken legs and a collapsed lung. She had dug herself out with her bare hands. "Told you," she whispered before losing consciousness. "No promises." By sunset, the evacuation was nearly complete. 9,000 civilians had made it to safety aboard the shuttles and emergency transports. The Council fleet was still 4 hours away. Only 11 humans remained alive, and all of them were wounded. Harrison had taken 4 separate injuries. He had been stabbed, burned, and hit by shrapnel. His armor was more blood than metal, but he was still standing, still fighting, still giving orders. Morales had run out of ammunition hours ago. She was now fighting with a blade that she had taken from a corpse. Her technique was not elegant, but it was effective. She had killed 14 in hand-to-hand combat. The final push came as the last evacuation shuttle lifted off. 3,000 warriors charged the human position in a desperate attempt to stop the retreat. The 11 remaining defenders formed a line and prepared to die. They killed over 600 more before they finally pulled back. When the Council fleet arrived 4 hours later, they found 11 humans sitting among the bodies of their enemies. They were battered and broken and barely conscious, but they were alive. And 93% of the colony had been saved. Admiral of the Third Fleet had commanded warships for over 200 years. He had fought in 13 major conflicts and witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. He thought he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. He was wrong. His flagship emerged from faster-than-light travel above 7, expecting to find a massacre. The colony should have been overrun hours ago. The 12,000 inhabitants should have been dead. They should have been picking through the ruins for anything valuable before moving on to their next target. Instead, the scanners showed the fleet retreating toward deep space. The colony was damaged but intact, and the survivors were sending emergency medical requests. "What happened here?" demanded. His tactical officer, a young named, was staring at his display with an expression of complete confusion. "Admiral, I am receiving data from the colony's security systems. The automated cameras recorded the entire battle." "Show me." The main flickered to life. At first, did not understand what he was seeing. The footage showed the eastern mining fields from an elevated angle. Warriors were charging across the open ground in formations that should have overwhelmed any defense. Then the humans opened fire. Watched as 30 small figures cut through the like they were made of paper. He watched them advance when any sensible species would have retreated. He watched them hold positions that should have been impossible to hold. "This is from this morning?" he asked. "Yes, Admiral. The battle lasted approximately 14 hours. 14 hours, 30 humans against the swarm, for 14 hours. "Yes, Admiral." Sat down heavily in his command chair. His species lived for 400 years on average. They were patient and careful and thoughtful. They won wars through superior planning and overwhelming force. The idea of 30 individuals holding off an army through sheer aggression was not just surprising, it was incomprehensible. "Show me more," he ordered. The footage continued. He watched a human soldier lose his arm and cauterize the wound himself without stopping. He watched a human woman collapse a building on 200 enemies and then dig herself out of the rubble with broken legs. He watched humans laughing as they fought, making jokes over their communication systems while surrounded by creatures that should have terrified them. "What are the casualty figures?" asked quietly. Consulted his data. The lost over 8,000 warriors, Admiral. "And the humans?" 19 killed, 11 survivors, all 11 are wounded but alive. Stared at the screen. 19 humans had stopped 8,000. 11 were still breathing. The mathematics of it made no sense. It violated everything he understood about warfare and survival and the natural order of species. "Admiral," said hesitantly, "the humans were using weapons. The Council ban specifically forbids them from possessing firearms." Turned to look at his officer. And if they had not possessed those weapons, what would have happened to this colony? "Everyone would be dead, Admiral." "Then I think we can overlook the violation." The flagship descended to the colony's surface. Medical teams rushed to help the wounded. Engineers began assessing the structural damage. Himself walked through the battlefield with an escort of soldiers who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The bodies of the lay everywhere. Thousands of them, scattered across streets and buildings and open ground. The smell was overwhelming. The scale of the carnage was difficult to process. They found the human survivors in what remained of the eastern defensive position. 11 figures sat or lay among makeshift barricades constructed from mining equipment and debris. They were covered in blood, both their own and their enemies. Their weapons were empty. Their armor was shattered. Some of them could barely keep their eyes open. But when approached, Harrison forced himself to stand and salute. "Admiral," said. His voice was hoarse from hours of shouting orders. 7 Colony reports mission accomplished. Civilian evacuation at 93%. Remaining population secured and awaiting transport. Stared at him for a long moment. This human was smaller than the average. He was fragile-looking, with soft skin and no natural armor or weapons. He was bleeding from wounds that would have killed most species hours ago. And he was still standing at attention, reporting for duty like a professional soldier. "At ease, Commander," said finally, "you have done enough." The footage from 7 was transmitted to the Galactic Council within 24 hours. It was marked as priority viewing for all delegates. By the time the chamber convened for an emergency session, every representative had already seen it multiple times. The Great Hall was silent as the footage played on the main display. 200 species watched 30 humans charge into certain death. They watched them bleed and suffer and refuse to fall. They watched them smile as they killed enemies that should have been unstoppable. Delegate of the collective sat in his usual position at the front of the chamber. 6 months ago, he had led the movement to ban humans from military service. He had called them dangerous animals. He had laughed at their short and their emotional decision-making. He was not laughing now. The footage showed Harrison taking a blade through the chest from a warrior. Any other species would have died instantly. Instead, shot his attacker in the face, pulled the blade out of his own body, and kept fighting for another 3 hours. "What are they?" finally asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent chamber everyone heard him. Daniel stood slowly from the observer gallery. He was still not permitted to speak at council proceedings, but no one moved to stop him as he walked to the central podium. "They are human," Daniel said, "the species you banned from protecting you." He let the words hang in the air. On the screen behind him, Morales was fighting 3 at once with a blade she had taken from their dead. She was 23 years old. She weighed 120 pounds, and she was winning. "6 months ago, you told us we were too aggressive," Daniel continued. "You told us we did not understand acceptable losses. You told us we were dangerous." He gestured at the footage. "You were right. We are dangerous. We are the most dangerous species in this galaxy, not because we are strong or fast or long-lived, but because we do not know how to give up." The chamber remained silent. Every delegate was watching the screen where 11 battered humans sat among the bodies of their enemies, waiting for help that had come too late to make a difference. "You wanted to protect yourselves from us," Daniel said. "Instead, you left yourselves unprotected. The came and your ships were hours away. Without those 30 humans, 12,000 of your citizens would be dead right now." He paused and looked directly at Admiral, who had entered the chamber to give his official report. "We did not ask for your gratitude. We did not ask for your respect. We asked only for the right to stand beside you as equals. You refused." Daniel turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped and looked back one final time. "The next time something like this happens, ask yourselves a question. Do you want humans fighting for you, or do you want to face it alone?" He left the chamber without waiting for an answer. Behind him, the footage continued to play on an endless loop, and for the first time in its history, the Galactic Council had nothing to say. The vote to overturn the ban took place 3 days after the footage from 7 was broadcast across the galaxy. The same delegates who had laughed at humanity 6 months earlier now sat in uncomfortable silence as the motion was presented. Admiral himself sponsored the proposal. He stood at the central podium where he had once celebrated the restriction of human military rights and spoke in a voice heavy with something that might have been shame. "I was wrong," he said simply. "We were all wrong. The humans are not dangerous animals to be contained. They are warriors of a kind this galaxy has never seen, and we need them." The vote passed unanimously. Not a single delegate opposed it, not even of the collective, who had spent a decade pushing for the original ban. But Commander Laura, who had been invited to address the council for the first time in human history, did not accept the reversal without conditions. She stood at the podium in her dress uniform, the same uniform she had worn 6 months ago when she watched her species be humiliated. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were hard. "You banned us because you were afraid," she said. "You laughed at us because you thought we were weak. You left your own citizens to die because you could not imagine that 30 humans might make a difference." The chamber was silent. Laura let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "We will help you," she continued. "We will fight beside you. We will bleed for you and die for you if necessary. But we will not be your attack dogs. We will not be unleashed when convenient and caged when you are afraid of us." Delegate leaned forward. His mandibles clicked nervously. "What do you want?" "Equality," Laura said. "Full membership in the Galactic Council. Voting rights proportional to our contribution. The right to carry weapons and defend ourselves without asking permission. That is unprecedented, said. No species has ever been granted full membership so quickly. No species has ever done what we did on 7. Had no response to that. He looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates, seeing the same reluctant acceptance on every face. And if we refuse? Asked. Laura smiled. It was not a warm expression. Then you can face the next threat alone. We have heard that they are regrouping. They are angry about their losses. They will be looking for revenge. The chamber erupted in worried murmurs. They had been driven back but not destroyed. They would return eventually, probably in greater numbers. And without human support, the Council fleets would face them at a severe disadvantage. We accept your terms, said finally, all of them. The agreement was signed within the week. Humanity became the 218th member species of the Galactic Council, with full voting rights and military privileges. The ban on human weapons was officially revoked. Human officers were integrated into defensive commands across Council space. Harrison recovered from his wounds after 3 months of intensive medical treatment. The doctors who worked on him were amazed that he had survived at all. They had found 17 separate injuries that should have been fatal. Your species does not know when to die, one doctor told him. Just smiled, that is kind of our thing. He was promoted to general and given command of the first joint human-alien military unit in galactic history. Morales received the first Galactic Medal of Valor ever awarded to a human. Cole was fitted with an advanced prosthetic arm that was stronger and more precise than his original limb. Almost worth losing the real one, said when he tested it for the first time. Torres spent 4 months in physical therapy learning to walk again. On the day she was cleared for active duty, she requested immediate reassignment to a combat unit. No one tried to stop her. The swarm returned 6 months later, just as Laura had predicted. This time they brought a fleet of over 200 ships and enough ground forces to conquer a dozen worlds. They had spent the intervening month studying human tactics and developing countermeasures. It did not help them. The human warships that met them at the border were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were fast and aggressive and crewed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of fight. They did not wait for the to attack. They charged directly into the enemy formation and started killing. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the fleet had been completely destroyed. There were no survivors. Across the galaxy, species that had once dismissed humanity began to study them with new respect. They analyzed human history and found thousands of years of conflict, survival, and adaptation. They read accounts of human endurance that seemed impossible. Soldiers fighting with mortal wounds. Explorers crossing frozen wastelands on foot. Civilians surviving disasters that killed millions. They began to understand what made humans different. It was not strength or speed or intelligence. It was something simpler and more terrifying. Humans refused to accept defeat. At the dedication ceremony for the new Human Defense Academy on Prime, Daniel gave the closing remarks. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species. Even was there, his mandibles clicking in what the translator now recognized as a sign of respect. 6 months ago, you asked what we are, Daniel said. His voice carried across the assembled crowd. You wondered how such small and fragile creatures could survive in a hostile universe. He gestured at the massive display behind him, which showed images from human history. Ancient warriors charging into battle, astronauts walking on barren moons, scientists splitting atoms, ordinary people surviving extraordinary circumstances. We are the species that crawled out of caves and conquered our world, Daniel continued. We are the species that looked at the stars and refused to stay home. We are the species that takes impossible odds and says, let us try anyway. He paused and looked at the footage from 7 that was now playing on the screen. 11 battered humans standing defiant among the bodies of their enemies. The image had become famous across the galaxy. It was displayed in military academies and government buildings on 100 different worlds. "You banned us because you were afraid," Daniel said. "And you were right to be afraid, but not of us." He smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. "Be afraid of what would happen if we were not on your side." The chamber erupted in applause. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in admiration for the small, fragile, impossibly stubborn creatures who had proven themselves in fire and blood. In the crowd, Laura caught Harrison's eye. The old soldier was wearing his new uniform with all his medals on display. His face was still from the Battle of 7. He would carry those marks for the rest of his life. He nodded once at Laura. She nodded back. They had been mocked and dismissed and banned. They had been told they were too aggressive, too emotional, too dangerous. They had been called animals and treated like servants. And then they had shown the galaxy what they were truly made of. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for the 19 humans who had given their lives on 7. Their names were carved into a memorial wall that would stand for as long as the Academy existed. Afterward, Laura walked alone through the gardens outside the Academy. The twin suns of Prime were setting, casting long shadows across the alien flowers and trees. Somewhere above her, human warships patrolled the borders of Council space, keeping the peace that their species had earned through sacrifice. She thought about the future, about the threats that would come and the battles that would be fought, about the humans who would live and die in service of something greater than themselves. She thought about all the species who had underestimated humanity, all the enemies who had thought them weak, all the allies who had doubted their value. They had all learned the same lesson in the end. Humans were small and fragile and short-lived, but they had something that no other species could match. They had the absolute refusal to give up, no matter the odds. They had the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. They had the crazy, beautiful, terrifying determination to keep fighting when anyone else would have surrendered. Laura looked up at the stars and smiled. The galaxy had mocked the ban on humans. They had laughed and celebrated and congratulated themselves on containing the dangerous primitives. They were not laughing anymore.